Laugh hard, run fast, and be kind. Peter Capaldi's era as the Doctor. We tend to call him the 12th Doctor. Some people debate that, but his time has come to a close. So that means that finally I'm able to do a top 10 episodes of Peter Capaldi's era. So that's nice. Been waiting on my ability to do that. I had to wait for Twice Upon a Time to air first, just in case it made the list. Now, a quick thing before I get into this. Making this list was hard. Like, harder than it usually is when I've done top 10s for, say, Tennant and Smith. Eccleston, I only had 10 to do in the first place. Because, a reminder, I count two-parters as one story. So really it's top 10 stories, not top 10 episodes. But it really was tough on this one. And I think part of what I realized is there are a lot of performances and moments that I love across Capaldi's era. But a surprising number of them are in episodes that I otherwise have a lot of issues with. To pull an example for an episode that did not make this list, the Zygon Invasion, Zygon Inversion two-parter, that speech in the Zygon Inversion is brilliant. It is wonderfully written, perfectly performed, but I also have a lot of problems with that episode as a whole in terms of story structure and some mixed themes that don't quite pan out right. And it's irritating, and there's a surprising amount of that in Capaldi's era. Lots of episodes that I like, but maybe didn't have the same highs, but then the ones that have the really high points also have some low ones that it's mixing. It's a matter of finding the balance. So there are some episodes that are on this list that if you'd asked me before I actually sat down to compile it, I would have gone, no, that's probably not a top 10 episode, and they're on this list anyway. So it was a weird one, this. That's enough preamble. Let's get into it. Number 10, Twice Upon a Time. Yes, I may be prisoner of the moment with this. It did just air. I did like it. A couple issues, but I did enjoy it, and I have now recently rewatched it. But I do think, personally, it's my favorite regeneration story of New Who, certainly. Prior to this, it was probably The End of Time, but Tennant's exit is really self-indulgent and just goes on for a really long time. But here, I love that the Doctor doesn't have something to fix. He thinks he does. He's looking for a problem. He's looking for an enemy, but there isn't one. And it's almost a reaffirmation that there is good in the universe, and the universe is worth saving. It's not always horribleness that he's always having to deal with and always encountering. And there were a lot of wonderful notes that went along with that. Mark Gatiss gave a really touching performance in his portrayal. David Bradley was really good as the first Doctor. They managed to bring back Bill in a way that actually worked for me and didn't completely undermine her exit. They even gave Clara a nice final note. And I don't even like Clara. Having now watched it a second time, I really do feel it is an appropriate ending note for his particular era. Number 9, The Pilot. This one had a lot to do. It had to reestablish what the current status quo of Doctor Who was in terms of him working at this university, being semi-stranded on Earth because he's got this fault to deal with, that Nardol's keeping an eye on him, and introduce Bill and set up their dynamic while also telling an interesting story. And it managed to do all that impressively, I have to say. I really do like Bill as a companion, and I went in expecting to not like her. I didn't like the little preview snippets we saw of her. I did, and I was annoyed that it was yet another on the younger side female companion from the modern era. I'm really sick of that template. So when they did that again with her, I was already annoyed. I saw the first glimpses of her. I didn't like it, but I got sold on her really immediately. I think her chemistry with Capaldi is fantastic, and it works really well. And also, thankfully, she has really good chemistry with Heather, which is kind of key because I usually don't go for the sort of love at first sight thing, and it still kind of stretches it here, but it still feels nice, and it works its way along. And there are moments that are kind of creepy. There are moments that are cool. I love the things that attract the Doctor to Bill, and talking about how when she hears him talking about something she doesn't understand, everyone else kind of frowns. She smiles, and like I said, there was a lot this episode had to do. It juggled all of it really well. I thought it was a pretty good story on top of that. Number 8, the return of Dr. Mysterio. I've talked about this one on a couple of lists now, so I'll try not to dwell on it too long. But short version, I understand why a lot of fans don't particularly like this one. Because if you aren't really into superheroes, yeah, it kind of reads a bit out of place or a bit like, why is this even here? But for me, it's just such a spot on sort of a little bit of a poking fun at, but also a little bit of an appreciation of, the importance of superheroes in general and Superman in particular. It really is riffing on Superman, and especially given how badly Superman has been handled, especially in movies in the past few years, I really like this. And again, Capaldi really does have wonderful chemistry with a heck of a lot of people. And he has terrific chemistry with Nardole. He has great chemistry with these other characters, with the hero, with the reporter, just with pretty much any time he's on screen. He just brings really good stuff out of people. And I love the banter, the snappy feel. I love that it has that kind of quick-witted to the point of people don't actually talk like that kind of dialogue, which I like anyway. I would rather have the characters in shows speak quicker and more wittily than anyone could reasonably come up with in real life. I want that, and I got it here. And like I said, I like superheroes, so I liked this. Number 7, The Magician's Apprentice and The Witch's Familiar, our first two-parter on this list. And this was this one that had some ups and downs as it went along. But first of all, the cold open on this was brilliant. With just that, the Doctor hearing the name Davros and just the slow close in on him with the camera just watching his face fall. Oh man. And then, I thought when we got into the second half, it's got downhill from here, but we still got some really great parts and the moments between Davros and the Doctor, really touching deep moments. And I know some people feel like it got cheapened because it's it was a trick the whole time. But for me, it kind of worked. I still feel it as a genuine moment. I think there probably is intended to be a genuineness behind that moment, even though Davros is also using it to try and accomplish a further end. There's some wonderful, hilarious moments in it as well. The only other chair on Skaro. Missy's awesome in this. I wish she had kept the pointy stick. I wish the pointy stick had become her thing. I would have loved that. But there's a ton of terrific banter in here. Missy with Clara is a lot of fun. And there's just, like I said, some really stellar moments and just this nifty story looking at the Daleks and trying to deal with them and dealing with their creator and what do we do with this guy? I really enjoy this story. Number 6, Extremis. Crap, I should have checked how to pronounce that. In any case, I like this episode a lot. Now, if you're wondering why I am dealing with the story in isolation as opposed to looking at it as part of a 3-part story along with Pyramid at the End of the World and Lie of the Land, well, the reason is, in my mind, Extremis is kind of a standalone story. Yes, it leads to the other two, but it also completes its own little thing. I think of it this way. I think of it in terms of the same way of the first Matrix film or the original Star Wars film. Yes, there was more to pick up and tell later and after that, but it really is a pretty complete story in and of itself. So I feel safe in still dealing with it as a single piece, which is good because those other two are not on this list. So I like a lot about this, and it does something that is really hard to do, because when you posit a mystery that is just really crazy, intriguing, it's really hard to deliver an answer that feels like it owns up to that. So when you say that there's this one fact, there's this one revelation, there's this one piece of knowledge that basically causes people to give up and kill themselves no matter who they are, no matter what their background, religious, science-based, no matter what, that's a hard thing to actually deliver on. And yet this thing managed to do that. It managed to give me something okay, yeah, I could actually buy that. And I love that the end to me is really triumphant, because even this computer program version of the Doctor, it will still throw a wrench into these guys' plans because he is a good enough recreation of the genuine article. And just that grin that he has at the very end, and it freezes. I know. I really love that. I think the build-up on this is fantastic, and it's intriguing, and the answers are not disappointing, which when you have a really high level of intrigue it's really easy for the answers to disappoint, and for me they don't here. Number 5, Flatline. Pretty straightforward story with just a little extra twist of the Doctor being stuck in the TARDIS. I mean, the reason is kind of wonderfully absurd, but it's a pretty standard story otherwise. It's just really well executed. It's a neat idea. It's an intriguing idea. These two-dimensional beings that they just... it's kind of unnerving what it is they do to people, you know, the way that they move and the special effect. I mean, the special effects on Doctor Who can go either way, but when they're inventive, that can make up for it, and I think that is the case here. It's a really interesting concept. I like that we have this group, and the ones who survive and the ones who, you know, what they do in the group, it doesn't automatically play to expectations. I like that a lot. It's an incredibly triumphant moment when the Doctor the TARDIS gets full size again, and he just marches out. He unbuttons the jacket and marches out that he's gonna defeat the monsters. Oh, that is awesome stuff. And again, there's nothing... This is one where the concept is not particularly exciting. It's a very nuts and bolts episode, but it's really well polished nuts and bolts, and it just hits. Number 4. Oxygen. This is one that, and when it started, the very first thing you kind of see, it looks just like, you know, space zombies. I'm just like, oh, all right, I'm not gonna like this. But then as we get more into what it is that's going on, why it's going on, all the funky little complications in how they have to deal with it. I really love that. I love when the rules are weird. And when I say the rules, I mean like the circumstances and the restrictions and the things that heroes have to do to get out of something. I like it when they're a little weird and it doesn't allow for a straightforward solution, but allows for a more clever solution, because the obstacles you have to deal with are also kind of like, oh god, this is what we're dealing with. And I love that approach to you know, issues and problems, especially in a sci-fi setting where so much of things are, you know, is run by computers and machines that can have a thought process that is not a human thought process. And I think all of that is executed really well in Oxygen. And I just think it really digs into the themes that it's working with, and I think it executes them quite well. And I like that this is more for later episodes, but it's worth bringing up. I like that there were lasting consequences to the fact that the Doctor went blind. I mean, how often does that happen? Cool stuff. Number 3, The World Enough in Time and the Doctor Falls. I wanted to break this one up and justify dealing with each one individually, like I did with Extremis, taking it out of that 3-parter. But I can't. The story isn't really complete at the end of World Enough in Time, and too many things are left hanging. It is a genuine 2-parter. I do need to treat it all as one story, which is a little bit unfortunate. Now, they both would have made the list, even individually. Doctor Falls would have been a little lower. World Enough in Time, by itself, would have had a shot at possibly even the top spot. It would have been close. But lumping them together, it comes in at 3. I've talked about World Enough in Time before, but it is an awesome, wonderful, creepy episode. I love how it really digs into what is unnerving on the conceptual level about the Cybermen. Not like as an army, as a force, but like the ideas behind what it is they are and why those are unnerving ideas and concepts. I love how much it digs into that. I love Mr. Razor in that first part. When it's revealed to be the Master, I was kind of like, okay, but like Mr. Razor as a character, I dug a lot and thought was neat, thought was interesting. And again, so many creepy moments. And then when we get into the second half, things weaken a little bit. I've said in the past, John Simm's quite good in this, but I'm not entirely sure how necessary it was to have it be a 2-master story. That feels a little gimmicky, and because that feels like the sort of thing that should be driving the narrative a little bit more than it is in this particular case. That said, a lot of great moments. Bill talking with the doctor, the fact that the doctor can't fix her, even though he said that he could, and he believed it when he said it, but he still can't. His pleading with the master, just be kind, which I think, it's funny that for a doctor that I think for a while some of us were thinking his trademark phrase was going to be shut up, he kind of ended on the recurring idea of just be kind. And I think that's his legacy more than anything else. And it's one of the things I've really loved about Capaldi is that he started out so harsh, ended so kind, and more than any other doctor that I can think of, he really had a character journey and a character arc across his time. And I love where he ends up in this episode, leading into Twice Upon a Time, which I've already talked about. Number 2, Mummy on the Orient Express. A title that sounds like this should be the most ridiculous, stupid thing ever, and it's just awesome. This has almost everything I love in a terrific Doctor Who episode. A cool setting, a phenomenal supporting cast. Both the actors and the characters they're playing, they're interesting, they're compelling. The way they work, their dynamics, their interactions, it's all interesting and worth seeing, which makes you care about them when they come in jeopardy. The situation is weird and bizarre, and in a way that, here's the thing, normally I get iffy whenever Doctor Who tackles what is kind of a more traditional supernatural foe, vampires, ghosts, werewolves, what have you, because I'm like, well, it's not what it looks like, it's something else. But just the fact that this is already on a train in space, I'm like, okay, you've given it the that's really the only added sci-fi bit I need. If this had been set on Earth and like, oh, it's a mummy, I would have been like, oh, come on. But it's like, wait a minute, what's a mummy doing in space? I'm so into this. It's a minor tweak, but for me, it makes a big difference. And again, just the doctor and his excitement and his intensity trying to work on this, trying to figure out this problem. And the timer and the clock and the ticking down, and that it's properly timed and going in real time, all just phenomenal, wonderful, tense, just terrific episode. My number 1 episode, Heaven Sent. Oh, wow. Okay, this episode is one of the most enjoyable emotional roller coasters I've ever gotten in entertainment. Forget Doctor Who, I mean at all. From a movie, from a TV show, from a video game. The emotional roller coaster and how condensed it was, and I'm gonna kind of come back to that, but everything from the setup, I love that it is a single location story, but that doesn't feel small, that it feels expansive, even though it's kind of a bottle episode, but it's kind of not. I love that he's talking to himself. I love that he sort of goes into his mind palace and he says, always assume I know how to get out of this. Can't wait to see how I figure it out. And him going through and the creepiness of the thing that's stalking him is really cool, and trying to figure it out along with him. What is going on? What's going on with this? And then at the end, realizing what's happening and see him start the loop again, and then see him start the loop again and again and again. And when I talked about that emotional roller coaster, this episode took me from a deep emotional sinking, oh dear God, what am I watching, to such a joyous triumph. So the low point is just seeing the loop start to play over and over and over again and going, oh my God, how long is this going to go on? It is completely hopeless. It is pointless. And it's perfectly timed too, because it doesn't quite give you enough time to think, how could he get out of this? Maybe it gives you enough time to think, is someone going to rescue him? But that's right when I noticed he's getting a little farther in that bird story every time. And then it's like, he's telling more of the story. Oh my God. And realizing why he was getting further in the story as he slowly chips away at this wall, and just the absolute rocketing of emotions, going from such a low place to such a yes, triumphant of him breaking through that thing. It was amazing. It was such an emotional journey, and like the peak and valley of it in such a confined space. It is masterful, and it is a surprisingly insightful look at grief and trying to process grief on top of all of that. And if you're wondering why this is in isolation by itself and I'm not attaching it to Hellbent as a two-parter, it's because it is a very self-contained story. It ends at a point that, yes, Hellbent has to pick that up and run with it, but in terms of the story it was telling, it was the story of him trapped in this castle. That story is finished. I consider it a standalone piece that simply leaves in place what the next story is going to start from, but it's not a two-parter. It is, however, a truly glorious episode of television, and my personal pick for the best episode of Peter Capaldi's run as the Doctor. That's my list. What's yours? Whatever it is, drop something down in the comments. Let's talk about it. Do all the stuff. Like, subscribe. I'm on Twitter and have podcasts and stuff. There's links for all that stuff below. And until next time, this council is adjourned.